The iron door slammed shut with a metallic echo that rattled through the stone chamber. The enemy commander lingered at the threshold, his face half lit by the dim torchlight. A cruel smirk curled at his lips. "One American soldier won't last a week here," Commander Muhammad Zain muttered in Arabic, his tone thick with certainty. But his words would soon return to haunt him. 3 days later, whispers spread through the outpost. Guards were missing, slipping into the dark and never returning. By the 7th day, Zane's confidence began to crack. His prisoner hadn't broken. She hadn't surrendered. She was hunting. Meet Staff Sergeant Alyssa Thompson, 29 years old. Chestnut brown hair, braided tight in regulation style. Eyes a piercing gray-green, storm-like, unflinching. For 4 years, she had served as a combat medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment, patching wounds under fire, pulling men back from the brink. But her hands could do far more than heal. She was a weapon in her own right, trained in silence, sharpened in shadow, and honed for survival in ways the Army could never fully understand. Her roots stretched back to the wild ridges of Montana, where childhood was not marked by playgrounds or suburban comforts, but by the cold bite of alpine winds and the silence of endless forests. Raised by her grandparents after her parents' absence, Alyssa grew up under the watchful eye of a man who was legend and a woman who was legacy. Her grandfather, Master Sergeant Anderson "Ghost" Thompson, had carved his name into Special Forces history during the Vietnam War. He was a Green Beret shadow stalker, sent on missions so classified they were whispered about only decades later. Long-range reconnaissance, silent eliminations, weeks alone behind enemy lines. His very code name, Ghost, had been born in jungles where he became invisible, while making enemies die loudly. Every weekend, Anderson turned the Montana wilderness into Alyssa's classroom. While other children spent Saturday mornings watching cartoons, Alyssa crawled through brush, learning to move with the wind, while others ate family breakfast. She was timing how long it took her to snare a rabbit or camouflage her tracks. Never coddled her, never softened his lessons. "Little Ghost," he'd say, his voice low, steady, uncompromising. "Survival isn't about firepower, it's about mindset. You don't beat your enemy with bullets. You beat them by making them believe they've already lost." Anderson's wisdom was not born of theory. It had been forged in the burning crucible of Vietnam. 3 tours had stripped him of illusions, teaching him that conventional warfare collapsed against a clever enemy who knew the ground better than satellites ever could. He taught Alyssa that war was as much psychological as it was physical, that being invisible, unpredictable, and patient was deadlier than any rifle. If Anderson was steel, her grandmother was wind, a Blackfoot woman whose lineage traced back through generations of hunters and warriors. She passed on knowledge that the modern world had forgotten. Elena Silent Feather Thompson walked with the land, not against it. From her, Alyssa learned to read the forest as if it spoke in whispers. A bent blade of grass signaling a footstep, a flock of birds scattering too suddenly, the unnatural stillness before danger. Where Anderson drilled her in tactics, Elena taught her rhythm. Move with the earth, breathe with the wind, feel the silence. She showed Alyssa how to blend her heartbeat with nature's pulse, how to vanish from sight even when standing in plain view. The Blackfoot stealth traditions were an art form, approaching prey so silently that not even a deer lifted its head until the arrow was loosed. The combination was devastating. By the age of 16, Alyssa could out-track seasoned hunters, live weeks in the wild with nothing but a knife, and disappear so completely that even her grandfather sometimes failed to find her in training drills. But it wasn't just survival she learned. It was resilience. Nights spent shivering in makeshift shelters, days without food, endless drills where Anderson would force her to start over if she failed even slightly. Elena, gentler but equally firm, reminded her that strength without spirit was brittle. Together, they molded her into something rare, a warrior who healed as fiercely as she hunted. At 18, driven by both legacy and fire, Alyssa enlisted in the U.S. Army. Boot. Camp instructors quickly noticed she was different. While other recruits relied on brute strength, Alyssa relied on anticipation. She seemed to sense ambushes before they unfolded. In land navigation, she never lost her way. In survival courses, she excelled where others barely scraped by. And in combat simulations, she used patience as her deadliest weapon. Her medical scores were exceptional. But what truly set her apart was her composure. Under stress, where others panicked, Alyssa calculated, she carried wounded men under live fire with the same calm. She used to set splints in training halls. One drill instructor reportedly said, "She doesn't just survive the battlefield, she belongs to it." That edge secured her place in the 75th Ranger Regiment. There, her dual nature emerged fully, the healer and the predator. Her comrades called her Doc, for the countless times she pulled them back from death. But they also whispered another name, one that spread through the barracks after night raids, where enemies never saw her coming, revenant. Now, far from Montana, far from the family who shaped her, Alyssa sat in an enemy cell. Commander Muhammad Zain believed he had captured a soldier. In truth, he had locked himself inside a hunting ground. His guards, men like Omar, patrolled with rifles and arrogance, unaware that every shift in routine, every careless detail, was being recorded by the storm-eyed medic in chains. What Zain didn't yet understand was simple. You can cage a soldier, but you can never cage a ghost. The training had been relentless, designed to push candidates beyond the threshold of human endurance. Every day at Ranger School was a test. Long marches under the scorching sun or freezing mountain winds, mental puzzles that forced split-second decision-making, and combat simulations that replicated the most chaotic scenarios imaginable. While most soldiers crumbled under the pressure, Staff Sergeant Alyssa Thompson moved with calm precision, her instincts honed by a lifetime of preparation that predated the Army. The lessons she had learned as a child, running through the Montana wilderness under the watchful eyes of her grandfather, Master Sergeant Anderson Ghost Thompson, and her grandmother, Elena Silent Feather Thompson, were now proving invaluable. She could read terrain like a map, anticipate enemy movement like a chess master, and survive in conditions that would have broken even the most hardened soldiers. By the time she completed her ranger training, she was not just a graduate. She was a force the instructors quietly feared. The medical component of her training was just as punishing. Combat medics were expected to stabilize critically injured soldiers under fire, make life or death decisions in seconds, and maintain full tactical awareness in an environment designed to overwhelm the senses. Alyssa excelled in these conditions. Her Blackfoot heritage had given her a knowledge of natural remedies and alternative medical approaches that complemented her formal Army training, while her grandfather had taught her how to improvise when standard equipment failed. Together, these skills created a hybrid competence. She was a healer who could also fight like a predator, but intelligence, no matter how thorough, is never perfect. The enemy had anticipated their movements. Commander Muhammad Zain, a strategist whose understanding of American military doctrine rivaled any U.S. planner, had studied the Ranger Regiment's tactics for months. He knew their strengths and vulnerabilities, their dependence on technology, and their reliance on superior firepower. He had crafted a trap designed to exploit every predictable response. As Alyssa's team approached the valley, what appeared to be a deserted camp revealed itself as a death trap. Hidden fighters emerged from caves and natural fortifications, creating overlapping fields of fire. Every possible escape route was covered, forcing the Americans into a controlled channel where they could be isolated, overwhelmed, and captured. Alyssa's team was separated instantly, chaos erupting around her. The valley, which minutes earlier had seemed quiet, now roared with the sound of gunfire, cries, and explosions. In that moment, every lesson Alyssa had learned from her grandparents, every endurance test, every stealth exercise, every early morning in the wilderness, all of it came together. She moved through the chaos like water, unseen and deadly. Each decision was instantaneous: when to engage, when to hide, when to advance. The ambush was sophisticated, calculated to destroy, but Alyssa was no ordinary soldier. Her instincts, honed over years of childhood drills, Ranger School, and live combat, guided her. She was patient, silent, and lethal, a hunter in her own right. Even as the enemy closed in, she thought strategically. Every shadow could conceal danger, every ridge might hide an escape route. She used the terrain to her advantage, forcing attackers into positions where they were exposed and vulnerable. She provided medical care to injured comrades, often under fire, never pausing long enough to be targeted. Her mind was a balance of calculation and instinct, of compassion and ruthlessness. This was Alyssa Thompson, not just a soldier, not just a medic, not just a survivor. She was a force shaped by two legacies: the Green Beret innovation of her grandfather and the ancient, silent wisdom of her grandmother. And now, deep in enemy territory, surrounded by traps and armed opponents, she was about to demonstrate why no human strategy could contain her. Amid the thunder of gunfire and the shattering roar of explosions, Staff Sergeant Alyssa Thompson moved through the chaos, tending to wounded teammates with practiced precision. Her hands worked steadily, applying tourniquets, checking vitals, and calming the injured. When a sudden blast ripped through the valley, rocks cascaded down, creating a barrier that severed her from the main group. When the dust settled, she realized she was alone, completely surrounded by enemy fighters, who had been lying in wait for exactly this moment. The separation had been no accident. A perfectly timed explosive device had triggered a rock slide, blocking any direct path to her team. Commander Muhammad Zain had designed this contingency with chilling foresight. Isolate individuals to capture them for intelligence and propaganda. For months, he had studied American tactics, combed through captured equipment, and analyzed reports from previous prisoners to construct an ambush that left little room for error. At 45, Zain was a master of psychological warfare. He commanded a well-disciplined cell that specialized in capturing American soldiers and breaking them through prolonged interrogation and deprivation. His methods were a combination of cunning manipulation, physical stress, and carefully orchestrated isolation. Every element of his compound reflected this strategy: soundproof interrogation chambers, small cells engineered to erode mental resilience, and medical facilities that ensured prisoners remained alive while under extended psychological pressure. When Alyssa was brought to the fortified mountainside complex, Zain immediately recognized a unique opportunity. For years, he had captured male soldiers, but never a female ranger medic. Her presence could serve a dual purpose: to extract critical intelligence about American special operations and to produce propaganda demonstrating that even elite soldiers were vulnerable. "One American soldier won't survive a week here," Zain said to his men, his voice carrying authority and contempt. "Especially a woman who believes she can fight like one of our enemies. We will crush her spirit and use her as a warning to the Americans." The compound itself was a fortress of careful design. Carved into the mountains, it was invisible to aerial surveillance, fortified against any potential airstrike or ground assault. Zain commanded roughly 40 fighters, each trained to anticipate and counter American tactics. The facility included secure armories, communication centers, training grounds, and high-security detention cells, all optimized for control, intimidation, and resistance to rescue attempts. Zain's initial plan had been straightforward: use isolation, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure to break Alyssa quickly, then begin extracting sensitive intelligence. He assumed that a medic, separated from her unit, would lack the tactical awareness to resist or escape, but he had underestimated her. From the moment she arrived, Alyssa quietly observed everything. Each day, while guards delivered meals, inspected her cell, or carried out routine checks, she mapped the layout, noted patrol patterns, and memorized every blind spot. Her medical expertise gave her subtle but deadly advantages: a precise understanding of human anatomy, knowledge of non-lethal incapacitation, and the ability to identify substances and equipment that could be repurposed into defensive tools or improvised weapons. Even under constant surveillance, she transformed the enemy's assumptions into opportunities. Every routine, every predictable movement of Zain's men became part of her mental map of the compound. She was alone, but she was calculating, adapting, and preparing. In the minds of her captors, she appeared compliant, weak, and vulnerable. In reality, she was already planning her next moves, turning their overconfidence into a liability they would soon regret. More crucially, Alyssa's Blackfoot tracking expertise gave her an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings. She could interpret subtle environmental cues, the slight shift in dust, the faint echo of footsteps through stone corridors, even minute vibrations through the compound's floors to map guard movements, predict shift changes, and anticipate the daily routines of her captors. Walls were not barriers, but instruments. She could discern conversations muffled behind them, detect patterns in patrols, and identify security flaws that Hassan's men had never considered. By the fourth night of her captivity, Alyssa Thompson had devised a plan that would transform her from a restrained prisoner into an unstoppable force. She didn't simply intend to escape. She intended to dismantle Commander Muhammad Zain's entire operation from within while gathering intelligence critical to future American missions. The first to vanish was Omar, a young and inexperienced guard assigned to night patrols. Alyssa had observed his every habit, noting his overconfidence and failure to follow procedures strictly. When Omar entered her cell for a routine check, she struck silently, using her medical expertise to incapacitate him without a sound. With his own restraints and equipment, she secured him and claimed his keys and weapons, hiding his body before slipping into his patrol route. Using shadows and stealth techniques inherited from her grandmother, she moved undetected, turning the enemy's own security measures into her advantage. Her aim was never merely to escape. Each night became a carefully orchestrated campaign. She eliminated isolated guards, gathered intelligence on compound layouts and defensive protocols, and positioned herself to systematically dismantle Zain's network. Her grandfather's lessons in psychological warfare were as valuable as her physical skills. By making key personnel disappear without explanation, she seeded fear and uncertainty among the enemy. Strange noises at night, missing equipment, and the sudden disappearance of guards spread paranoia like wildfire. By the fifth night, Alyssa targeted the compound's communications officer. Using shadowed corridors and silent movements learned from her Blackfoot training, she infiltrated the communications hub, neutralized the operator, and gained access to the compound's intelligence systems. From this, she extracted critical information, the locations of other cells, plans for future attacks, and the identities of Zain's network of informants and suppliers. This trove of data would be invaluable, but only if she survived to transmit it. The next 2 nights saw the systematic removal of the guards, responsible for perimeter security. Each operation tested her ingenuity, forcing her to navigate areas patrolled by multiple soldiers, all growing increasingly jittery and suspicious. By the 7th day, Zain's compound teetered on the brink of chaos. Half his personnel had vanished. Communications were compromised, and his men spoke in hushed, fearful tones about an unseen adversary who seemed to anticipate every move. Zain himself began to grasp the magnitude of his miscalculation. The woman he had expected to break, to comply and reveal secrets, had become a ghost, an invisible adversary dismantling his operations with surgical precision. "Locate her immediately," he barked to his remaining fighters. "She cannot have simply disappeared. Search every corridor, every chamber, every tunnel." But Alyssa was already far beyond their reach. She had established a hidden command hub in the compound's maintenance tunnels, a sanctuary crafted from her intimate knowledge of building systems and her Blackfoot concealment techniques. From this unseen base, she coordinated her campaign, watching the enemy descend into desperation while remaining invisible, untouchable, and deadly. From her concealed vantage, Alyssa Thompson could observe Commander Muhammad Zain's every move, track the patrols of his remaining fighters, and plan the final stage of her operation. The enemy leader, who had believed intimidation and isolation could crush her resolve, had no idea that the American medic had transformed into a calculating predator. The intelligence Alyssa had collected revealed a chilling truth. Zain was orchestrating a coordinated assault on an American forward operating base. Multiple cells were set to strike within days, with hundreds of U.S. soldiers at risk from simultaneous attacks designed to overwhelm defenses and inflict maximum casualties. Alyssa understood that escape alone would not suffice. Her mission had grown. Beyond survival, it had become a crucial operation to dismantle Zain's network and prevent a mass tragedy. She would need to neutralize the entire command structure of the terrorist cell to ensure American forces were not caught in the coming assault. On the 8th night, Alyssa launched her decisive offensive, using a combination of weapons captured from her earlier victims and improvised devices. Fashioned from medical supplies and maintenance materials, she struck multiple targets simultaneously: the armory, the communications hub, and the command bunker. Explosions tore through fortified walls, while the confusion from disrupted communications prevented Zain's remaining fighters from coordinating a coherent defense. The psychological toll of a week of mysterious disappearances had already sown fear and distrust among the enemy ranks. Now Alyssa moved like a ghost through the compound, striking unpredictably, exploiting every vulnerability she had meticulously mapped over the past 7 nights. Many of Zain's fighters, unable to comprehend the invisible threat stalking them, abandoned their posts and fled into the night. The final confrontation came as expected. Cornered and desperate, Zain attempted to reach his emergency communication console to call in reinforcements from other cells, but Alyssa had anticipated this contingency. She lay in wait, knowing the exact route he would take. When he entered the communications chamber, he found her there armed and unflinching, with documents and digital files exposing his entire network, operations, and planned attacks. The medic, who had been presumed broken and compliant, was now the architect of the enemy's complete undoing. Alyssa stood over Zain, her calm demeanor masking the storm of precision and skill that had brought her to this moment. "You were right about one thing," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "One American soldier couldn't last a week here, but I'm not just any soldier." In that moment, the operation that had begun as a desperate fight for survival had transformed into a full-scale dismantling of an entire terrorist network. The American medic had become both the weapon and the strategist, leaving no doubt that her presence in the region would forever alter the enemy's plans and protect countless lives. But I'm not just any soldier, Alyssa Thompson said, her voice calm but unwavering. I'm a ranger medic trained by Blackfoot, trackers and taught combat skills by Green Beret legends. I don't merely survive, I adapt, strategize, and neutralize threats to protect my fellow Americans. The death of Commander Muhammad Zain marked the collapse of a terrorist network that had been orchestrating one of the largest, coordinated attacks on U.S. forces in the region for years. The intelligence Alyssa had painstakingly gathered during her captivity disrupted multiple Allied cells, preventing assaults that could have claimed hundreds of American lives. 3 days after her emergency transmission, a rescue helicopter reached the compound coordinates. The crew expected to recover a single, captured medic, but instead found one soldier who had dismantled an entire enemy operation. The compound was silent except for the fallen enemy, and in Alyssa's possession were detailed intelligence files outlining the network's personnel, planned operations, and logistical infrastructure. The pilot's report quickly circulated in Special Forces circles, becoming a story of legend. We came to extract a single captive, the report read, but we found one ranger who had neutralized a full enemy compound and averted a major attack on American forces. Major Christian Pulisic, the Special Forces officer assigned to debrief Alyssa, stared at the intelligence files in disbelief. Sergeant Thompson, he said, his voice tinged with awe. What you accomplished in just 8 days defies all precedent. You didn't simply escape. You executed a full-scale intelligence operation while dismantling a terrorist network that posed a direct threat to hundreds of American soldiers. Alyssa regarded the officer, aware that no formal report could truly convey the reality of her mission. Every observation, every action, every decision had been a combination of instinct, strategy, and skills inherited from her Blackfoot grandmother and taught by her Green Beret grandfather. Sir, she said simply, meeting his gaze, I did what any ranger would do. I adapted to every challenge, turned every available resource into an advantage, and neutralized threats to American forces with precision. The enemy had believed that capturing me would shatter my resolve. Instead, it handed me the opportunity to dismantle them completely. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Alyssa Thompson was promoted to Sergeant First Class and offered assignments with the most elite Special Operations units. Her daring escape and the systematic destruction of Commander Muhammad Zain's network became a case study in advanced military schools around the globe, illustrating how strategy, stealth, and determination can turn a dire situation into a decisive victory. More importantly, Alyssa's ordeal erased any lingering doubt about the capabilities of women in high-risk combat missions. Her week in enemy captivity proved that sometimes the most lethal warrior is the one the adversary underestimates. Today, Master Sergeant Alyssa Thompson instructs elite Special Operations soldiers in survival techniques that blend modern military doctrine with Blackfoot tracking skills and Green Beret tactical innovations. Her students learn that true resilience isn't measured by avoiding danger, but by transforming confinement, adversity, and isolation into an operational advantage. Have you ever been placed in a situation where others expected you to break, only to discover a strength you didn't know existed? Alyssa's story reminds us that our most extraordinary victories often come when we are backed into a corner with no path forward except through our enemies. The terrorist commander who believed he could break a single American soldier soon discovered that confinement often sharpens a warrior's edge rather than dulling it. In some battles, the hunter becomes the hunted, and the prey reveals itself as the apex predator. If you understand that true warriors are forged in moments, when surrender seems inevitable, share this story. Somewhere, someone is facing impossible odds, unaware that they are about to demonstrate the resilience of the human spirit, a spirit that cannot be crushed by those who confuse temporary advantage with lasting control. Alyssa Thompson did more than survive enemy captivity. She turned it into the enemy's worst nightmare. Every plan, every trap, every expectation her captors held against her became a weapon in her hands. Her presence inside the compound became the deadliest threat imaginable, proving that sometimes the most dangerous position for your enemies is exactly where they think they have you trapped.